I don't see a lot of people that I suppose don't know who you are, so I'll just dive in with the must question these days, and that's how's life in the pandemic for you? Can we start with Juliet?
Well, actually, it's not too bad and not too different. Yeah, I mean, I've been working at home for 20 years. Um, there was about a year ago there was a fairly major adjustment when my husband started working from home. But fortunately, we have a spare bedroom and we got him set up with all his various bits of kit. And there are two doors that I can close between him and me and whatever web conference to discuss building cars, because that's the line of work he's in. He's a tool design engineer in the motor trade. Web conferences going on, sort of noises off. I've learned an awful lot about aluminium spot welding. And we meet up when one or other of us puts on the kettle. We have a coffee and we meet up and we have lunch, and so it's all pretty civilized, and we are extremely fortunate that we're both in jobs that we can do from home. Our kids are in their 20s, so neither are at school or at university. They are both still in work. One lives with us, one's up in Yorkshire. So all told, although we are thoroughly fed up of going nowhere and seeing nobody, there are a lot of people have it a great deal worse.
Yeah. How about you, Adrian? How's it going for you with the homeschooling and everything?
Oh Lord, well, yeah, homeschooling, which has been a thing for the last sort of several weeks, it's been awkward because it's large chunks out of the day that I can't do much about except just work round. But I mean, overall, I'm fortunate. I would normally be out of the house to write, but I can write in the house, obviously, just as well. And I very much reacted to the stress of the whole situation by knuckling down and just getting more done. So I'm quite, I mean, I know a lot of writers who've had quite the opposite reaction. So I've been very lucky that that's the way my mind goes, is just to, frankly, retreat from reality.
Actually, same here.
I was gonna, yeah.
Yeah, just, basically shut everything else out, focus on the book or various projects in hand, and just crack on with it. But as Adrian says, I know a lot of people have had hideous writer's block.
Mm-hmm.
Unless I'm mistaken, you've both had a book out in this year, right? The Green Man Silence came out this year, right?
Well, I had one book.
I mean, last year.
About 19. I may exaggerate slightly.
No, but your latest Green Man was 2020, right?
Yeah, that's there we go. Green Man Silence. The covers by Ben Baldwin just get better with each book, and they started out completely brilliantly. I'm really thrilled with those. So,
can you tell for those few, I guess, in our audience who haven't read it, a little bit about the Green Man?
Well,
I think I have. Well, she sure is just. I have number 2 here.
Oh, excellent. I can't spot number 2 on the bookcases. That's the first one, The Green Man's Heir. And
this is the second one.
And that's the second one. And Green Man Silence is the third one. All available from Wizards Tower Press, and people are enjoying reading them. I've been reading urban fantasy pretty much since it started. Vampires, werewolves, down these mean streets, supernaturals must go, set in various American cities, and enjoyed them enormously. And when you enjoy a subgenre of books as a writer, you pretty soon realize whether or not you've got anything to bring to the party. And I realized that I had absolutely nothing to bring to the vampires, werewolves, down these mean streets, American cities stories, because so many people were doing them so extremely well. But there's an awful lot of other myth and folklore and monsters out there, particularly English, British myth and folklore, which actually isn't necessarily only English. I've seen foliate faces, Green Man faces, in a museum in Zagreb.
Yeah.
There's very old folklore tied to the land, tied to nature, tied to trees and forests. And one of the very interesting things about these things is spirits of trees, spirits of rivers, people who can shift themselves into animals, birds, hares, swans. Most of these creatures, people, are female. So, and that's all there in the existing myths. And one of the things that occurred to me that was you could do quite an interesting new take on the classic themes that have emerged in urban fantasy with a male protagonist who is mostly human and all of these various female supernatural entities, and set it in the countryside, particularly the British countryside, where there are an awful lot of things that have changed enormously. I mean, I live in the Cotswolds, and I've lived in the country in various parts of the UK. An awful lot has changed in the last 20 years, the last 40 years. But equally, an awful lot of things have stayed exactly the same. And there's a very interesting tension between change and permanence in the countryside. So I thought, well, that's all interesting, fertile ground. And I was staying, this was about 10 years ago, I was staying with my father and stepmother, who at the time were the butler and housekeeper for a grand country house in the centre of Ireland. And I went out for a walk one day around 1,000 acres of Irish woodland. And after about an hour and a half, I came back and I had an entire novel in my head. And that is the only time that has ever happened to me. It was quite unexpected. It is not the usual way I work at all. And that essentially was the Green Man's Heir. So I sat down and I wrote it and couldn't place it with an agent or a publisher, because the prevailing reaction was, yeah, but you're an epic fantasy writer, and epic fantasy fans won't read urban fantasy, and urban fantasy fans won't read this because you're an epic fantasy writer. And I thought, I think you might find people are a little bit more open-minded than that, but you know, the industry is the industry. And I've been working with Wizards Tower Press, run by Cheryl Morgan, a great friend and supporter of Creation Fandom.
Yep.
And we've been putting out my backlist as ebooks and as print-on-demand books. And we looked at each other and thought, well, we could put this out ourselves, couldn't we? And we thought, you know, yeah, we could do that. You know, if we made our costs back over, say, 6 months, that would be a success, you know, in a small way. And we'd made our costs back in 6 weeks.
Wow.
And the Green Man's Heir has now sold over 15,000 copies.
Awesome.
So people wanted another one. So I thought, well, I could write another one. And I had another idea. And then people wanted another one. And I had already got another idea for that. Now I'm writing a 4th one and trying not to have too many ideas for the one that will come after that.
That sounds awesome. I saw on Twitter that you actually posted that if there is a book 3, it doesn't mean automatically it's a trilogy. And I was thrilled to see that you were writing the 4th one.
Yes, various people have been sort of saying, you know, the Green Man trilogy. No, there are 3 books so far. That doesn't mean a story told in 3 installments that's come to an end. Basically, as long as I carry on having ideas, I'll carry on writing the books. They're as much fun to write as they are to read.
Cool, thanks. Adrian, yours is The Doors of Eden that came out in September, right?
Yes,
Did
I'm
it?
slightly embarrassed to say that I've had a book and a half out since then. But
Really?
possibly 2.5 books. Yes.
So just walk us through it from the most recent one then.
Oh, well, so this year I've had a bit of a flurry. So we've got that's the way around. Bearhead, which is the sequel to Dogs of War, did that a few years ago.
Oh, cool.
Although unusually for my sequels, I think you could probably pick this one up and just read it on its own. I think certainly in the UK, it's on like a 99 pence deal in Amazon at the moment, somewhat unexpectedly. And in the States, we have the Expert Systems Champion, which is the sequel to the Expert Systems Brother. They're both science fiction. Dogs of War and Bearhead are set in a world where people have engineered kind of cyborg animals, originally for military use, and by the time we get to Bearhead, for all sorts of different purposes. And the books are really an exploration of sort of free will, authority, command structures, moral choices. For the what you get in the first book is very much the lead character starts off as a soldier doing exactly what his master tells him because he's a soldier and because he's a dog, and then gets cut off from the chain of command and has to start considering what is actually the right thing to do himself. And it kind of goes on from that, and it's got all sorts of different avenues. It takes the idea of, well, what if you have things that are effectively alive? The old scientific idea of, well, if a thing is sentient but created, what rights does it have? And then Bearhead takes that further, and it also looks, of course, at the extent of that war. How does this reflect on what rights people have and how people treat people? The Expert Systems books are set on a colony world that's kind of forgotten it's the colony world. So the settlement has kind of devolved and has a lot of things put in place by its creators to protect it from a very, very hostile environment, including effectively changing the biochemistry of the people there so they can live in it. And the lead character, Henry, gets cut off from that as a punishment, and then basically discovers the truth about his people's past as he tries to survive in a world which is now suddenly trying to kill him at every turn.
Fun times. One of the things that I'm noticing in the science fiction I've been reading recently, and in the epic fantasy as well, come to that, is one of the themes that a lot of writers are exploring at the moment is the relationship between ordinary people and authority, and the extent to which if the people who are nominally in charge break, for want of a better term, the social contract, what rights, obligations and choices do the ordinary people have? Which I suspect is emerging from an awful lot of writers' subconscious because of the prevailing political situation, certainly in the UK and the US.
Yeah, I was going to say, I can't imagine people are...
Yeah.
I mean, it's... I would say, of course, it's something you yourself in your own epic fantasy have tackled that very directly and head on. A number of your books. I mean, it's something I have a crack at in my earlier stuff in Shadows of the App. So that's authority, truth to power, and all of that has always been a major reason to write speculative fiction, because you get to explore it freely rather than being kind of trammeled up by what actually happens in the world.
But there is a fine balance, a fine line to walk between making your fiction applicable and allowing what's going on in the world to influence what you're writing, almost sometimes to the occasion of warping it. I think we've probably all come across books where the message is not so much whispering in your ears, hitting you over the head.
I mean, frankly, I think I've written some of those books, to be honest. If only because you get to the point sometimes where you feel that actually some people don't hear whispers, and maybe you actually have to shout a bit louder with the message of your writing to try and get through to people. And also, frankly, because it's better to do it in a book than do it out of the window. I felt that those were kind of my options on occasion. So
yeah.
So, but I wanted also to hear about the Doors of Eden, Adrian.
Sorry.
Because that no, I'm not going to let go of the Doors of Eden. Sorry. So tell us about it. I really liked the fact that there were girls who were protagonists and characters. If you could just, it seemed, I read your Children of Time and kind of connect you to that book a lot as an author. I did read other stuff, but this is when I hear Adrian, that's the book that my mind goes to. So this was a little bit different for me as a reader. So could you tell us how that came about? And it seemed...
I mean, I would say that, of course, that Children Have Time also has girls who are protagonists. They're just also spiders.
I know. Yeah. That is totally true. Yes.
Yeah, Doors of Eden. Doors of Eden is the book I've wanted to write for a very long time and never quite had the courage to do so. And this is mostly because it is kind of an excuse for me to go completely mad on speculative evolution and paleontology, which are not subjects you'd necessarily think would make an enthralling narrative, but hopefully I've managed to get over that hill. I at LonCon 3, the London the big science with the London WorldCon, however many years ago that was, they had a
2014, it says so on my glass.
There we go. But they had a phenomenal speculative evolution stream, and I met a lot of really sharp people who had done kind of alien evolution and alternative Earth evolution. And I kind of knew then I really want to write a book about that, but I don't want to write a book that just has one alternative evolutionary stream, because that wouldn't be doing the subject justice. And so I kind of ended up with Doors of Eden, which, as well as being a narrative about people sort of about creatures finding their way into our world from alternative timelines where different things have evolved, is also just an excuse for me to go completely mad on a sort of what might have been, covering everything from the trilobite and the Cambrian on up to the modern day.
That sounds awesome. I recommend everybody reads that if they haven't yet. I wanted to start with the recent books because I want to ask a question, like a personal experience of both of you. How different or weird, or how is it for you promoting the books now as opposed to 2 years ago?
Well, it's all online. For which we can be hugely grateful that our genre is so good at tech. I've done various conventions, various panels now. I think it's tremendously fortunate for writers like myself and Adrian who've been doing conventions and panels for a good few years now, because I'm generally doing them with people I already know, people I've already met. And that helps because the social cues, the body language, that sort of sense you get that the person at the far end of the table really wants to say something and you should actually stop talking, much harder on screens. It's much harder to get the measure of people you haven't met and paneled with before. So in that sense, it is harder work. I also find it still quite peculiar to have to swap from being working at home mode to being at an event mode, because normally you're in a completely different place. I do not have the cat scratching at the door, and so there's a bit of an adjustment there. But I think we are hugely fortunate that science fiction fantasy has been a very online genre, probably longer than pretty much any other.
Yeah, I mean, I genuinely, I really miss going to conventions, and it feels crazy that it's been, over a year now since the last one I was at, and is likely to be a good 6 to 9 months before I actually get to turn up at one. But I mean, as far as promotion goes, I don't know how much conventions really work compared to just actual sort of national promotions online and off for a book. So that's far more of a social thing. So online conventions like this are good. I suppose actually they've got the advantage over a physical convention that a lot of people who wouldn't be able to get to any individual place or have mobility issues or in the wrong country or whatever can still get along to anything they like of this nature. and it is. I can't think how long it was before the first convention like this turned up online, but I don't think it's very long after the whole sort of situation started that people were already planning them and putting them into action. And like you say, I think we would just, I suppose, both because we have that convention culture with a lot of genres don't have, and because we have the, as you say, the expertise, we were very well placed just to get those wheels turning. And other than that, a lot of the online promotion, honestly, is the same old as it was before.
Cool. I love the part that this is my experience as well, that I could get to some conventions that I never get around to getting to. Because if you travel to Worldcon and something else outside of Croatia, that is about it a year. And then all these conventions that you've heard of or that have had panels that people talk and write about for like eons afterwards and you never get to it, that feels like, oh, and now it's all accessible. So I like that part. Do you miss the travel? The travel itself?
I like going to new places. I like seeing new people. The actual spending N hours in trains, planes, automobiles, airports and stations is much less thrilling. Though you can generally get a fair amount of reading done, or even some work.
I write really well on trains.
Yes.
So, but I don't think I write necessarily better on trains than I do just being at home. So yeah, there's a lot of dead time to the travel. You kind of feel, I often feel that the one sci-fi invention I'd like to import into real life would be teleportation.
Yes, jump shift.
Yeah, you can go there now.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely what we need.
Oh, I'm back. My embarrassing moment. So as long as we're on the topic of having promoted stuff and being on cons line, would you like to share, if you have one, the funniest embarrassing moment online in the past year, whether it was a con, a Zoom meeting or whatever? Do you have any?
I don't actually, well, I hope. I don't think I'll pick one, possibly because I'm much more conscious of not doing something stupid. Though I was asked in a meeting, not a convention, but a meeting, about the books at the back. Somebody assumed it was a projection, a backdrop, and were quite startled when I turned around and actually took a book off the shelf.
It's amazing what they can do with technology these days.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Some American politician somewhere who did actually have a printed cloth backdrop to make herself look as if she was sitting in some very impressive library, apparently. But having taken it out of whatever it had been packed in, she'd neglected to iron out the creases, which apparently was a bit of a giveaway. I'm not thinking about that.
I always get baffled by time zones. I have missed events I was supposed to be a part of this last year because I just turned up an hour late or whatever. So I mean, and given that I live in absolute terror of being late for things, and I'm just habitually early, that's just torture to me. So I mean, God, I've got a thing on in a day or so. I've got something in an American convention, which again is not something I'd ever normally be at. I've never been to the States. It's a bit beyond my normal traveling range, and I need to sit down and painstakingly work out what Eastern Standard Time is in the UK, and then do all the translation of the times, and then I'll have to do it all again, because even though I'll have done it, I will then not trust my own having done it properly. So I have a bit of an OCD thing going on about timing.
Timeanddate.com, very useful website.
Timeanddate.com.
I was just about to Google the one that I use not to miss stuff, and I do check it every like 15 minutes. Oh. And I also do manage to miss stuff anyway, because when the clock shifts and then it doesn't shift in the other country, I'm still an hour off without knowing it.
My husband in the last year has at various times been working on projects with teams in America, Holland, or the Netherlands, Germany, and China. So he ended up just writing numbers on big pieces of paper and sticking them all above his monitor. You know, if it's X in UK, it is this time in all these different time zones.
So I've had a question from the audience. So I'm going to move the discussion a little bit differently now.
Okay.
So Juliet, you were very active a few years back in Vatmos. For those of you who don't know, so Ruth is asking, with your involvement in the campaign and the fact that you re-released the books recently with Cheryl, you have a wealth of experience of adjusting your career in the midst of financial change. And she's asking what your advice to budding writers, both in the time of gig economy and the B word in the UK, would be.
Be flexible. I don't think it's fair to say that there is still an ongoing degree of confusion and uncertainty in, quotes, traditional publishing. I have an epic fantasy novel written, which we are not actually, it's the one that you saw a bit of at
Milford, yeah.
Milford, that we're not taking to market at the moment because, frankly, things are simply too uncertain. So don't be in too much of a hurry. And as many eggs in as many different baskets as possible these days. I've had approaches from mainstream publishers who would like very much to take on the Green Man books and cash in, and you know, they've promised me, oh, we could do this, that, and the other, and I've then, no, thank you very much. I'm very happy with what's going on. Because I read the contracts very carefully and I do the sums extremely carefully, and I have a degree of control which I am not willing to surrender with those books. Equally, I've got various other projects on the go where I am working in a much more conventional relationship with different publishers. If you're going to self-publish, if you're going to work with small presses, and definitely look at small presses, do your due diligence, make sure that they are reputable outfits, because there are sharks and charlatans out there. But some of the small presses, of which we still have a really good selection in science fiction and fantasy, and not only in the UK and the US, but across Europe, are doing some very, very interesting work. You see the books crop up on prize lists. And beyond that, absolutely right, the very best book you can. If you decide to self-publish, you need to pay for a professional editor. You need to pay for a professional cover designer if you don't have those graphic skills yourself. Because it will make a significant difference in the long term. You need to be thinking about the long term. You need to be thinking a year ahead, 2 years ahead, 5 years ahead, and not being too much of a rush. And if you're balancing the costs against returns, 75% of a useful sum of money is a useful sum of money. 100% of not really very much at all is not very much at all.
Adrian, do you want to continue on that, or shall I?
I mean, I honestly,
asking?
I don't have much. I mean, I think Juliet's considerably better informed on this subject than I am. Other than, oh God, sorry, the cat has just forced her way in through the door. So we may be joined.
Yay for you have to show the cat now.
I literally cannot bar the cat from this room now. She can force the door open. I have no idea how she does it. But yeah, I mean, I work with a variety of publishers, sort of both the like big 5 level publishers and also smaller publishers. And I've certainly written shorter fiction, at least for small presses. And every level works differently, and every level has its pros and cons. Cat. And yeah, I mean, I am at the moment I am phenomenally fortunate in that I'm essentially working with a number of publishers at once, and so I'm trying to kind of get the most out of the pros and avoid the worst of the cons, I guess. But it's eggs and baskets is a really good way of looking at it, as Juliet says.
So I know one of the eggs and baskets thing that Juliet had done is teaching writing I would like to, since we have budding writing questions, maybe go into that a little bit. I know that most genre writers really like workshops, and I know Juliet likes them. I don't know about you, Adrian. Did you do workshops? Do you hold them? Did you attend them? What's your, where do you stand?
I have run a couple of workshops, I think all exclusively at Edgelit, which is a small convention in Derby in the UK. Mostly because it's a small crowd and it's a home crowd, and I can get over my nervousness. It's not something that comes naturally to me, to be honest. Frankly, once I actually get speaking on a subject that I genuinely feel I can contribute on, I don't tend to stop. But for me, there's quite a big kind of speed bump you have to get over before I can get onto that point. I always feel when you get onto the wider subject of writing, rather than simply like talking about writing a fight scene, which is something I've done, or constructing religions in secondary fantasy world, or that kind of very narrow focus, I'm always a bit worried that what works for me is not going to be something that works for someone else, because I know that there are plenty of different techniques out there, and most writers seem to have their own particular toolkit, much of which I find, that wouldn't work for me, but I see that it works for you. So I'm always a bit leery about how much useful, broad advice I'm really in a position to give.
I think that's the case when you're teaching any skill, though. I think it helps enormously that I also teach a martial art. And one of the fundamental, well, apart from the yes, and by the way, if anyone wants to argue, I do have a black belt. But one of the sort of underlying principles of teaching Aikido, which is the martial art I study, is there are as many different ways of doing a given technique as there are students on the mat. And the core principles will be the same, but the details of the execution will vary depending on height, weight, age, gender, a million other variables. So you look at what somebody else is doing, you see what will work for you, and you incorporate that into your own practice. And the way that my elder son would do a technique, given he's 6'4", and the way I would do it, given I'm 5'6", there are going to be significant differences. So I'm not going to incorporate lessons from an instructor who's over 6 foot into my personal training. And exactly the same is true of writing. There are umpteen ways of achieving a given end. Some will work for you, others you will look at and think, nah. I mean, I have no idea how people can write in coffee shops. I couldn't do that with a gun at my head.
I love it.
Really could. Yeah. So, there is no one true way.
Yeah, it's something I genuinely miss.
Well, I miss workshops because generally when I run them, I learn something. And I like that part a lot.
I've never run a workshop where I haven't come away with something directly applicable to either my own writing in the broader sense, or frequently, so there'll be something about the book I'm writing at the moment that is just not quite gelling, and I will come away from workshop knowing how to fix that problem.
So how do you feel about workshops online? I mean, Milford, for instance, the one that I went where you were, that seems completely undoable online. But do you think?
So. Yeah, I haven't even tried to do a workshop online. I mean, I occasionally, when time permits, I take on students one-to-one and critique manuscripts, and we go through that on Skype or Zoom. But that's like being in the same room sitting across a desk. So the dynamic there is very much the same. I don't know how you would do a group workshop online. I haven't had a go, and it strikes me as something that would be really quite a challenge.
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of, I mean, not writing workshops, but I know a lot of teachers who have obviously had to adapt to the circumstance, and teaching groups via this sort of medium is really difficult, because it's like you were saying earlier about just the cues. you're not getting that sense. You don't know how engaged people are. You don't know how to kind of tailor your pace and energy of presentation to the reception of the room or anything like that.
Mm.
And I would think with something where you're teaching something like fine detail like writing, that will be even more so.
Agreed. I went to some online ones, but none of them were as great an experience as Milford was. I see in the chat that we have a whole cat thread. I have to ask, Juliet, do you have any cats?
We have 3 cats. We have Opal, who will be asleep in a box by a radiator somewhere. She's about 7 years old and is a calico cat and very, very nervous and skittish. But she has loved having both of us at home all day, every day. She has, she's always been a very nervous cat. She was a rescue, and she's come out of herself having us at home. And then there's Sooty, who is a young, rambunctious boy cat, who gets a bit puzzled. So why are we not downstairs playing with him? And comes up to find out who is sitting in what room or what desk, and walks along the desk and generally makes his displeasure felt. But at the moment, they are both elsewhere.
Oh, there are also fish. So many people with so many cats. I know that both of you at some point, or possibly still are, into role-playing games. So I would like to invite you to share about that. If you agree, there's not a gazillion of the audience, and I would like to maybe unmute them for questions, because I haven't gamed a lot, so their questions about that might be better than mine if they want to ask them.
Yeah, okay.
But can we start with, I love that story about you building a whole series from a gaming experience, Adrian.
Oh, with the Shadows of the Apt. Yeah, it was, I mean, really, that was there's a phrase, a Hail Mary pass. That was my writing of the Shadows of the Apt, was very much of that. So I got to the point with writing and submitting. I've been trying to get published for about 15 years at that point and got absolutely nowhere. I'd had literally one request for a manuscript out of 12 books sent, and that was sent back pretty damn quickly with a no thank you. So I thought, right, I'm going to give it one big go, and I'm going to write something that I feel really comfortable with and really invested in. And so I dusted off the world of a campaign I'd run at university years before, which is the world of the Insect Kingdom, and various characters from the campaign and places and a few events turn up in the books, although most of the actual sort of narrative is new. And I suspect it was that deep familiarity with the setting and how everything worked, and the way I was able to bring over what is frankly quite a bit of a weird setting for epic fantasy into something that obviously resonated with the readers was what got me, well, was what got me somewhere as a writer. So it was the right choice. And obviously I'm probably kind of kicking myself I didn't think of it 5 years sooner, but also I know what I was writing, what my writing was like 5 years before that, and it was not very good. So there we go. But yes, all genuinely based on a role-playing campaign. And I mean, weirdly, the thing that got me into writing in the first place was somebody's role-playing campaign. Not anyone I knew, but it was the campaign that gave rise to the Dragonlance books, which were some of the earliest kind of Dungeons and Dragons based novels, because I love those books. And then obviously they are genuinely based on someone's gaming campaign. And that gave me the suggestion, well, actually, that kind of narrows the divide between regular person and published author to something I feel I can potentially sort of bring. Whereas before, the idea of doing something like that would have been completely beyond my conception.
Yeah, well, the Tales of Einarin world was a world we were gaming in. Tabletop gaming in one region of it and LARPing in another. And again, I think exactly what you say, Adrian. For a start, as a writer, you have that deep familiarity with the source matter, which means you can then focus on the nuts and bolts of the writing. Because certainly when you're first starting out, what I see in students is they're either very good at one or the other. The work is brimful of ideas, but the execution really isn't up to it, or things are beautifully wordsmithed, but there's no spark of originality. And balancing those two things, certainly when you're starting out, is very difficult. And also, I think there are a few better trainings for a writer to avoid the obvious, how to create surprises, how to wrong foot people, how to get people going, she did what? Than running games. Because any halfway decent group of gamers, be it live action or tabletop, are absolutely merciless. If you give something away, you're too obvious with your cues, your clues. If the surprise, the payoff, the boss encounter just isn't worth it, you will know all about it immediately in real time. You don't have to wait to read the reviews on Amazon from somebody who's given it 1 star 6 months later. Yeah, you will get the dagger-like looks across the table.
I remember. Please.
Sorry, you're.
No, go on.
I do have a theory, given the proportion of gamers in certainly the British fantasy writing pool, sort of who were coming up before me or at about the same time as me, or I genuinely feel that a lot of the direction that fantasy writing has taken, especially the grimdark genre and things like that, is because of gaming. Because if you're taking things from Tolkien, then you tend to have a lot of very well-behaved protagonists, and they do nice, good, noble things at the good and appropriate and noble times. Where if you take it from role-playing, you have a lot of really, really badly behaved protagonists who will do the wrong thing every possible opportunity to screw up the plot and make things worse for themselves and the world. And that's kind of the sort of fantasy we were getting in the 90s and early 2000s. Led to, I think, quite a boom in the genre. And I genuinely think it is because many of the writers are coming out of that role-playing kind of background.
I think that is a very, very solid theory.
So I have questions from Discord. Might Bite wants to know, did you ever want to invent your own RPG game?
On the basis that the version of 2nd edition Dungeons and Dragons that we've been playing for nearly 35 years is unrecognizable. If you go back to the source material, I would say we probably have done. Game mechanics are a means to an end as far as I'm concerned. Playability, speed, playability, getting things done. But I can get to grips with a set of rules and run with them. I'm not one of those people for whom game mechanics is something that I understand on an instinctive level. Fortunately, I married a man who does.
Yeah, I mean, the original Shadows of the App game was a homegrown system in and of itself, but it was also terrible. I would not want to resurrect that in any way. And one of the things, I can write prose. I can't necessarily design a good game system. That's a very different skill set. So, I mean, I would love to be involved in that sort of thing, but there also these days there are a lot of systems to be had out there that are very explicitly there for people to take in modern use, like the Powered by the Apocalypse system or the Blades in the Dark one, or even, I mean, the number of different spins turning up on just the most recent edition of Dungeons and Dragons, for example, is quite remarkable.
Yeah, the number of D20 based rule systems out there, and they're very flexible.
Cool. Ruth was following up on Maya's question, asking, would you consider a one-off game at a convention? I have a feeling this is going somewhere.
Well, oddly enough, I have done that. And the first time I did that was in Croatia. And I had a blast. I had a great time.
Oh, that's awesome. Can you tell us more about it? I don't
have dice will travel. I'm quite happy. pick up and GM. I've done it a couple of times. It's always great fun.
Yeah, I've played in a few. I've run sort of, as it was, sort of small private games at conventions. I've not quite one of the things the games I have played in and the games I have seen run at conventions for public consumption tend to be broad comedy ones, which is fine, and I've really enjoyed them, but it's not the sort of game I tend to be able to run. And I don't know how well running something for kind of for serious stakes would work in the same kind of slot. I think you do need that kind of that joke mill going, that banter, to keep an audience constantly engaged. I might be wrong on that, and it would be interesting to try it, but
I think you just answered Davar's question, which was how hard would it be to write a story from a sword and sorcery with high magic like D&D, where all the fun and games are in the game, but to him it seems like putting it only in a story sounds a bit much. His words. I think you could do it with one. Actually, it's one of the things I've certainly had the sense that after the quite a long period of very low magic, fantasy fiction is going more high magic these days. I think we're having a bit of a bounce back from that. And what always fascinates, I think the problem with high magic fantasy can be when there isn't really a logic behind the magic, in that, well, you have a world and the magic can do this, this, and this, but nobody does it. Nobody uses the magic to do the things that would just make their lives easier. Yeah. And all right, sometimes that can be because the magic comes with a cost or it's restricted to a certain type of people, but frequently you get stuff that you feel surely people will be jumping on this to use this for just basic life improving stuff, or ways for that they would be able to exploit other people or the world, something like that. But because magic is mysterious and strange and weird, for some reason it never gets to that. And it's one of the things that Juliet and Aaron books do extremely well, is the magic fits very, very rationally into the world as to who uses it, why, what it does, and why it doesn't do certain stuff,
and why people don't do certain things with the magic that they could do. I agree with you absolutely, Adrian. Yeah, you've got to think all these things through, and you can't have, why do wizards not rule the world? Because they're jolly decent chaps. That is not an answer for anyone else but Gandalf.
And I quite like the way the wizards work in Scott Lynch's Lies of Locke Lamora. Is they kind of do rule the world, but they rule the world in the sense that a mob boss rules a city. They just extort everyone else, and as long as everyone keeps basically giving them money, they don't turn you into a chicken or blow you up. And that's it. They kind of sit back, just kind of being a very light touch sort of dominant criminal cartel in the world, because they've got all the magic and they make damn sure no one else has it.
Recent book, Shadow of the Dead God by Patrick Samphire, which, if you've been following self-published fantasy book off, or whatever it's called, it did very well in that. And that's an interesting take on what people do and do not do with magic and why.
Cool.
There's, some of my favorite older fantasy books are by Hugh Cook. He wrote 10 almost completely unknown books called Chronicles of an Age of Darkness, out of, I think, a total of a 60-book series he was intending to write. So
can you repeat the title?
Yeah, so the author is Hugh Cook. They're the Chronicles of a World of an Age of Darkness, I think. They're all the something and the something, and all the somethings begin with W. So the first one is the Wizards and the Warriors, and you have an early scene. There are 3 wizards of varying seniority. They are traveling. They meet a dragon. They attempt to fireball the dragon and miss. And the missed fireball is like, well, that's about 90 years of your amassed energy and meditation completely wasted, vaporizing fog. And then the most junior wizard, you find out, well, he's the only wizard who has not been bitching all this time, because he packed waterproof clothes, and the other 2 And it's just the idea that, yes, they're wizards, they're vastly powerful, they can do all these things, but also there are limits and they just need to hoard their energy, and they're completely impractical people.
Well, certainly more than one wizard in my Tales I Narin is based on certain aspects of certain tutors I had at Oxford University.
Oh, really? Do tell more.
They have absolutely no interest in ruling the world because they are far more focused on their extremely specialized and very, very particular area of research.
I remember reading the tales when you came to Istrakon, well, a little bit before it, and I loved that it was 5 books, not 3. And I also loved that it had a shifting point of view, which seems to have caught on in like the recent decade, as opposed to, you did it, what, 20? How many years ago?
2 years ago.
Yeah.
Yes, I was well ahead of the curve, May.
Well, actually, yes. When I look at those books now, you had a female mercenary leader and gay characters and switching points of views, and that's all something like people take for granted. And your books were the first ones where I, as an adult, had fun with that, and I totally loved it. Can you, how did publishing that go for you? Did you do the regular published short stories route, or did you find a publisher for it immediately?
No, well, I never published short stories before I published novels. Short stories is something I have come to subsequently. I wrote a definitive blockbuster fantasy masterwork, Youth Leaves Home, Rites of Passage, yeah, every cliche imaginable when I was at university. If it had ever got published, it would have had the heft, weight, and literary merit of a breeze block. And I had almost to get that out of my system. And it did the rounds of agents and editors and came back with, yeah, the first time it went out, it came back with photocopied, "Thank you for your submission. We are not interested in doing it at this time." Million generation photocopy on the skew, not even signed. So I learned a bit more about writing. I rewrote it. I think I improved it. Well, I know I improved it because the second time it did the circuit of agents and editors, it came back with rejection slips that actually had been written by real people. Which said things like, you know, your world building is very interesting. You have real strengths of dialogue. However, and the howevers were summed up by the one which said, "There is nothing to distinguish this from the 6 other perfectly competent fantasy novels that have crossed my desk this week."
Ooh.
But when you get that sort of feedback, you either take it on board, listen to it, and learn from it, in which case you will grow as a writer, or you sulk, in which case you're going nowhere. And I started going to a crime and mystery fiction conference in Oxford because that's close to where I live, and it was at my old college. And I started hearing editors and writers and publishers talking about, this was crime fiction, but an awful lot of the same things apply. And I went to a session with a commissioning editor who said, what we're always looking for is the same but different. Something that we can sell to existing readers, but it's new, it's different, it's bringing something new to the party. And I had been reading epic fantasy for years by that stage, and I was thoroughly sick of the farm boy leaves home, finds a mentor, discovers he's a lost prince, a secret wizard, or possibly both. And the women basically tag along looking serene and beautiful and doing the cooking. Because that's just not how I see myself in a fantasy world. But at the time, the independently strong-minded female private eye was just starting to get traction in crime fiction. V.I. Wachowski, Kinsey Mulhone, Kate Brannigan. Yes, and I thought, how about we take that character essentially and drop her into an epic high fantasy setting. That's new, that's different, that's interesting, and that is where basically the idea came from, and it worked. So the same but different.
Cool. How about you, Adrian? Did you publish short stories before you published novel, or did you come to them late like Juliet did?
I mean, I think it's 95% late like Juliet did, except for the 5%, which is the handful of stories that I have published under the real spelling of my name in a tiny, tiny magazine called Xenos, which for payment for which was a copy of the magazine your story was in. So technically there is a handful of my stories out there that almost nobody has seen. And they're mostly not very good. But no, I mean, I very much, was a long form fiction writer, and then I kind of became aware of things like the small press market and anthologies and so forth. Once I'd begun to make contacts in the industry. And I remember actually badgering Ian Waits of Newcom Press because I really liked his anthologies and I was desperate to get a story in with him. So he actually published some of my earliest short work.
Yeah, I've written Newcom Press. PS Publishing do some great anthologies.
Mm-hmm.
And ZNB, Zombies Need Brains, over in the States. They do some really interesting anthologies, and all of their anthologies, they fund them through Kickstarter, and they reserve a certain number of slots for open submissions for new writers.
That's good.
Oh, can I ask you to type their name into the Zoom?
If I can work out where.
Or I can just ask you later and put it in Discord.
If you click on the chat thing, it should open up a window that you can open.
Yes, I think we've established I'm not good with tech.
That's okay.
And one thing I have found, the novella length format, which was not a thing, commercial thing when I was sort of coming up through the ranks, and for the first many years of me being an author, is now doing tolerably well. I think a lot through at least partly through the efforts of Tor.com making a lot of their flagship titles in that length. And I've found I love writing short fiction of that length, 30 to 40,000 words. Mostly because I find if you have, especially for a science fiction book, if you have an idea that you really want to explore in a fairly lean and efficient way, that's the length it tends to hit.
I think that format is ideal for ebooks.
I agree.
Ebooks, I think ebooks have done wonders for short form fiction in all of its various lengths.
The one area it still struggles with the audiobook, and that's entirely because of the Amazon the Audible what do they call it, token system, because you pay one token whether the book is a kind of a 5-hour novella or an 18-hour epic book is still one thing, and therefore it's quite difficult to sell audiobooks of novellas.
Well, I found it interesting. I love novellas. First of all, I've always loved them, and I forever bemoaned how not enough people were writing them, and I wasn't aware that it was not easy to publish one, like a quarter of a century ago. And I loved the fact that the online formats kind of brought it back. I did have a very strange experience with John Scalzi's, what was the first one? The one that I was, just give me a second. It was released on Audible first, and it was actually written for Audible. And then it felt really strange reading it in written format. It kind of totally threw me. Like I was reading two different stories, and I was wondering if you're aware, are there other people who are also writing novella length stuff, but exclusively to be read? Because I think the murder by other means is the second one, and I just can't find the other one.
That's not something I'd heard of, actually.
I knew it was happening, but it's not something I'm sort of engaged with at all. I
Okay.
cannot listen to books.
Come again?
I cannot get on with audiobooks at all.
Oh, okay.
I know they're absolutely invaluable. Yeah, I know a lot of people love them. I know a lot of people have an audiobook on the go and a print book and a Kindle and all the rest of it. They've been an absolute lifesaver for my father, who's lost his eyesight. But I cannot get on with them at all. My mind wanders. I can't. I just get distracted.
Okay, I mean, I love them, but I tend to listen to audio, with some exceptions. I tend to listen to audiobooks of books I've also read physically beforehand.
Oh, interesting.
The annoying thing is the back catalogue of books beyond a certain age is shot full of holes, because obviously the publishers tend to be more interested in bringing out the audiobooks of the new things they are releasing. So going back and recording a book, even quite a popular book, either that or some of the older popular ones were brought out as like cassette tapes or CDs or whatever back in the day, and now the legalities presumably mean you can't just do another version of it.
Cool.
But yeah, when I can get them, I really like re-experiencing a book through the medium of the performance that the reader's giving it.
Me too. I really like audiobooks. The one that I was thinking of is called The Dispatcher. I had gotten it on Audible thinking that it was an actual novella. That was published in print somewhere, and I just happened upon it in audio form. But later I found out that it was written for reading out loud, and I think well, I'm able to follow for some reason. I don't know why. I've always liked listening, and I do also get tired of screens, and when I get tired of screen time, I also get tired of looking at a book. One of the things that I found as a non-native entirely English speaker is the fact that a story will change or open for me in different ways if I hear it performed. For instance, there was When Nano Came to Clifford Falls by Nancy Kress, which I had read in a book a gazillion years ago. And then at one point, one of the magazines, when they came up with the audio parts, I don't remember whether it was Strange Horizons or Starship Sofa or somebody had that particular story done in audio, and the story was read in a really heavy Southern American accent. And I didn't pick up on the clues in the story itself where it was happening when I was reading it. In my head, it was like a general, transatlantic American accent that I was hearing. But when it was read in the South American accent, it was Southern accent, pardon. It was a completely different story.
Yeah, it would be.
Yeah, so that is one of the reasons that I like audio, and I like different narrators, and to try and experience the same book with different people reading them. So how I wanted to ask, let me just check if there are any questions while I pasted a shit ton of links into Discord. I wanted to ask about your reading habits. Do you like binge read between writing your books, or do you always read something? What do you prefer? Fiction or nonfiction? How does that work? Do you guys review stuff?
I do review, and I can read fantasy and science fiction for review when I'm working on a fantasy or a science fiction project, because I'm in that analytical frame of mind. I find it very difficult to read fantasy and science fiction purely for pleasure and enjoyment as a reader while I'm actually working on a book. I'm in the wrong headspace. So while I'm actually working on a book, I'll be reading a lot of crime fiction, crime mystery fiction, or non-fiction for research. I generally do try and have a book on the go, but I've actually found during the ongoing everything, it quite hard to focus on. I can shut the world out and focus on writing. I find it much harder to shut the world out and focus on reading. It's something I have to make a conscious effort to do, and when I've done it, I feel better for it. So.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a bit of the opposite, actually. I always have a book on the go. I'm almost always reading within genre, and if I stop reading, I tend to slow down with the writing. Or if I find I'm reading a book that I'm really not enjoying, it tends to mean the wellspring of the writing dries up a bit. So I feel that reading turns the mill to a certain extent, and just kind of keeps my own sort of creative wheels turning. I've got to say my reading speed absolutely nosedives over 2020. Partially, at least, I think I just wasn't traveling, because normally I'd be, taking a train into Leeds to go to the Waterstones Cafe to read, or to write, or something like that, and I would read a lot on the just on the journey. But I've now I've started to make spaces in my day to read, and I'm getting my my actual consumption back up again.
I think, I don't know, my reading also fell this last year. We'll not talk about that. So I wanted to ask, you were both guests at creation conventions. So I don't know if all the people who are listening to us now have been to a creation convention or were there when you were there. So could you tell us a little bit, what did you like the most, and what was most surprising when you were in Croatia? So Juliet, you were in Pazin as a guest of honor at Istrakon, right?
I love the fact that there were people who'd come from so many other countries. The sort of pan-European, there was a chap who'd hitchhiked from Hungary. I didn't know it was possible to hitchhike from Hungary to Croatia. And the demographic of European fandom seems to be, there's a significantly younger cohort, which I find very encouraging, and these are all very energetic, lively and entertaining people, so that was great. What did I find? The fact that I had my own personal simultaneous translator for the weekend, where I had learned about, I think, 20 words of Croatian by the end of the weekend. But Zrinka did a superb job as my simultaneous translator, so I was actually able to access a lot of the program that was in Croatian. So that was fantastic. I mean, I speak reasonable French, a bit of German, and enough Greek to order a hotel room and a meal. Which makes me an international linguist by English standards. I think one of the most surprising things was the very end of the weekend, everybody went out to dinner, the convention committee and the guests. And then there was at the end of the meal, there was a roundtable discussion of what had worked, what hadn't worked, problem solving, getting things out in the open. And it was quite, I've never been to a British convention where anything like that has happened, or indeed probably could happen. I think you have to have a culture of that kind of collective feedback. But it seemed to be, it was not something I'd ever come across before, and seemed to be a very constructive and positive way of, as it were, debriefing the event and laying, learning lessons for the next time. So that was, I think, the most surprising thing.
Cool. And Adrian, you were a Cerakon guest and a virtual Eurocon guest for which we will forever be sorry, because Rijeka is awesome. What did you like the best, and what did you find the most surprising?
I mean, I'm going to echo again a couple of things that Juliet said. The very the multicultural nature, the number of different sort of surrounding countries that people had traveled from to get to Sphericon, and how integrated everyone was. So we had guests from all across Europe. We had sort of attendees from all across Europe, but it wasn't when you go to a Worldcon, say, you often feel, all right, that table over there, that's the Finns, and then you have the Japanese over there, and you have the and you get the impression that it's still quite tribal, whereas there wasn't any of that. Everything was very, very You felt everyone was on equal footing, everyone was being made very welcome, and as Juliet said, the youth and energy going into what was a very long-standing convention was really a joy to see. So I had a phenomenal time. It was one of my favorite overseas conventions I've been to.
Thank you. So we have
the other thing that I struck me was Adrian was talking about integration. People were talking about films, they were talking about books, they were talking about TV, they were talking about gaming. There was none of that tribalism, which occasionally crops up in UK and US conventions. You know, you're a fan of science fiction, fantasy, it would appear in Croatia, you're a fan of it, however it turns up.
I think it helps that a lot of our con runners are also writers who are also cosplayers, who are also gamers, who are also quiz people, who are also, and take your pick. So you can't really oust anybody because they all have these fun hobbies, or maybe it's just us being strange. I don't know. Because for years, for instance, Recon, when I would think of that convention, it's an awesome convention. There was programming all the time. But for years in my head, it was the convention that we went to for the quizzes. I mean, the other conventions had quizzes too, and programming and everything. I actually did other programming for Recon, but in my head, quizzes. And I don't know, every Croatian convention is fun in its own way. Yeah. We have like 15 minutes to go. So I was going to ask Davor if he's still here. Davor, are you still here? Can you unmute people so they can ask questions and do comments? Because I could, you know, go on with questions of my own for 3 hours. I'm wondering if I'm...
Wait.
You muted everybody.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, so now you is everybody unmuted now?
Oh yeah.
Guys, ask questions if you want to.
Everybody should have a request to unmute, so they should be able to do it.
Okay, if they want to, if there's no background noise. Guys, if you want to ask. If not, I'm gonna continue. Where is the further, we're at conventions now. So where is the furthest that you've gone to, be it as a guest or just as a member to a con?
San Francisco.
Wow.
Yep. I think that's my furthest, longest trip.
Was that a Worldcon or some other convention?
I've done well, it was actually in San Diego, but I went to stay with friends in the Bay Area for a week beforehand. That was a great trip. I was just, you know, I was an author. I wasn't a special guest or anything. But that was a good trip, interesting trip.
How about you, Adrian?
I think Croatia is the furthest I've traveled. I am not that much of a traveler, and I generally, in kind of both time and money senses, unless someone is actually flying me out somewhere, I can't generally afford to make that kind of trip to the States, say, or anything like that. And so yeah, I mean, I guess I don't know the precise geography, but it's likely to be either Croatia or possibly Helsinki. I suppose I tend to think of distance as east-west, but of course Helsinki is pretty far north. So
I don't know. We would have to see. I can't tell either. Oh, what was I gonna ask? Oh, now my mind is thinking distance. Helsinki, Zagreb, because I want Zagreb to win. I know that. What about con running? Were you part of the science fiction con scene before you went there as an author, Adrian?
I was not, and I genuinely think that was probably for the best. I was very, very desperate to get published, and I am also, although I have kind of learned very coping strategies, very, very bad at being a sociable human being. And these are a terrible combination when you're in a room full of potential editors and agents. I think I would have got myself blacklisted from the entire industry, never been published at all, because I wouldn't have been able to abide the thought that somewhere in this room is someone to whom I can say some sort of magic word that will get me a publishing contract. And yeah, I would have been absolutely dreadful, and people would have been thoroughly sick of me. So the fact that I only started going after being published, honestly, quite a few years after being published, because and that very reluctantly initially at the behest of my publishers, was probably a really good thing.
Okay, cool. And Juliet, you ran an EasterCon, didn't you?
I ran an EasterCon, but I didn't come into conventions before I was a writer at all.
Oh, okay.
One of my editorial team at Orbit was saying, yeah, you really ought to try conventions. You really ought to try conventions. And my attitude at the time was, this is going to be full of very strange people wearing plastic Mr. Spock ears and cardboard Daleks, isn't it? And Lisa said, no. And the first convention I went to was a WinCon in Winchester in England. And that was the first one I went to because my mother lives 10 miles away. So I could go and stay with my mother and stepfather. And that meant I had an escape route. So if I did end up surrounded by complete weirdos, I would make my excuses and leave. And I went over there. This was at King Alfred's College in Winchester. And the first person I met was somebody I hadn't seen since university, who had been in the Dungeons and Dragons group that I ran. Hello, Mary. Fancy seeing you here. And the second person I met was a guy called John, who had been a regular customer when I had worked in a comics shop in Oxford. Oh, hello, John. Jules, what are you doing here? Etc. So I thought, I think this might be rather fun. And mostly it was. That would have been 2000. And I started going to different conventions, and in the UK, in Scotland, in Ireland. And fairly early on, I think, made contacts with European fandom. Wasn't entirely, I think, like Adrian, the fact that I went in as a writer certainly had some pluses to it. It also did have a downside, bearing in mind that we're talking 20 odd years ago, and that is something that has vanished now, for which I am extremely grateful. At the time, if you went in as a writer with no con credentials, no fan credentials, you would get referred to, sometimes to your face, as a filthy pro. Which is not a term, yes, which I can see you've not heard that term, Adrian. I'm extremely pleased that that has died a death. So there could be a certain amount of tension there, and that is one thing that has very definitely changed for the better, which made me very wary of getting involved in con running, because there was a definite element of, you know, stay in your lane. But some other fans put together a rescue bid for the EasterCon in 2013 and came to me because they said, we've got a committee, but we need a chair. We'd like it to be you. Why? You're organised and get things done. What you mean is I'm bossy, don't you? Well, you might think that, but we couldn't possibly comment. And the thing is that essentially running a convention is an exercise in extremely complex project management, which is something I had done. So yeah, but I've run various things in various organizations because basically I'm a bossy managing type. If I see something that needs doing, I have a tendency to roll up my sleeves and get involved. And getting involved in con running is tremendously rewarding.
Thanks.
Can
I was surprised to see you listed as EasterCon chair, because it had been explained to me, although nobody said filthy pro as a thing that people were called to their faces.
It was
But-
something that very much came over from America, I think.
But it was strange for all of the Croatian fans to go outside of Croatia to the US con and see the divide, because we don't have it at all. And then hearing fans refer to people as pro or fan was like, what do you mean? There are no pros that are not fans. Like, what are you talking about? So that was an awkward explanation. I have a few questions here. Ruth says, Juliet, I met my best friend at that EasterCon you ran and had a very important conversation with the publisher there. And Kate is waving from Ireland.
I have had some brilliant experiences at Irish conventions, where again you don't get that divide, because I think it's a smaller world. It's a smaller it's a smaller country. It's a smaller group of people. And
Valeria on Discord is asking, how often do you guys get invited to be on cons in other countries, and how do you choose whether you're going to accept or not?
It varies enormously depending on how high or otherwise your profile in any given year is at the time. And my choice of whether or not to accept an invitation is really no choice, because basically unless somebody nails my feet to the floor, I will grab my passport and go. I love people. I like to meet new people. I like to see new places.
Well, back in the before times when this was a thing, yeah, I mean it is a profile thing, and I went from, when Children of Time took off, I went from kind of almost never to about twice or three times a year getting the invite in, and I have had to juggle them, and sometimes, you know, there are several I've really wanted to go to but just couldn't have found the time away.
Oh, he froze.
Oh, hello, am I still there?
You're still here for me.
Okay.
Yes, now you're here for everybody.
Okay, well, you two were fine, for that was weird, but yeah, it's a matter of just juggling the time with with family and work and everything else. I mean, I've only been a full-time writer for a couple of years, so I've had a lot to juggle in the past.
Yes, right from the word go, because I started writing when my kids were small. The fact that I've got a husband who is more than happy to wave me off and spend a long weekend being duty parent made it possible.
That sounds awesome.
Juliet, you were talking about the cardboard Daleks and the Vulcaneers. Can I just tell a very quick anecdote about my first big convention? So this was an EasterCon. What got me there in the first place was because George R.R. Martin was going to be there. Game of Thrones was just taking off, and I was going to be on a panel with him. And I thought, well, I can't not do that. That would be professional suicide to turn that down. But I'd never been to a big convention before, and EasterCon is one of the big annual UK conventions. It was being held in one of those huge, rather horrible Heathrow hotels, where there are lots of space, but basically no natural light, and the thing was 4 days long. And by the third day, I'd lost all track of time and really who I was and what was going on. And I remember looking across this huge bar space, and it's not a cosplay convention, EasterCon, or it certainly wasn't back then. And so you had this room full of people, all in normal kind of fan style garb, and one person done up as a Klingon. A full-on next generation, great big knuckly forehead, full spiky uniform Klingon. I remember thinking, does anyone else see the Klingon there, or is it just me?
Yeah.
Last time the World Cup was in Glasgow, I got into a taxi, and a very bemused taxi driver asked me what was going on, because he had just seen a Klingon in a kilt. And I shouldn't have said the accent, but he said in broad Glaswegian confusion, "You don't see that on a Saturday night, even in Glasgow."
That sounds awesome. Any other questions? Let me see. Just give me a second. Thank you for sharing that anecdote. I love convention stories.
Well, if we got started on that, I think we'd be here till midnight.
Yeah, I know. I think we have 5 more minutes. So if anybody wants to ask a question, bless you, the time is now. So going once, going twice. Nope. Everybody's shy. It's weird. Croatians tend to be shy on the online stuff, but not in person.
I think everybody is shy on the online stuff. Again, it comes back to that not being able to, as it were, feel the atmosphere of the room. Yeah, there just isn't the same energy.
True. Oh, Maya says hi and says she's home alone with the kid, and that didn't turn out well on another lecture.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you both for coming and for taking the time to talk to us and to contributing for earthquake relief. And thanks everybody who came to listen. I hope you had fun. And if I haven't asked something that you wanted me to ask, well, tough luck. You had your chance.
It's on social media. Ask that.
Absolutely.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been great fun. And I look forward to getting back to Croatia at the earliest opportunity.
Absolutely.
We would love to have you. Like, we need to have a post-pandemic huge party with all our guests.
Oh yeah.
Just hang out. I hope to see both of you soon at some convention.
Yeah.
Bye.
Cheerio.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Bye.
Right. All done.
Yeah, thank you, Juliet.
Thank you. I hope we can meet in person sometime.
Yep, we have each other on Twitter now, so
yes,
that's a start.
Excellent. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.